Hello, today we're going to talk about the Cask of Amontillado and the Storm. These are the two stories that you were supposed to read for this week. I'm also going to tell you some points about the literary elements and how they relate to these stories, and just give you some broad overview points that will help guide you as you complete your assignments and think about these stories. First of all, it's important to talk about the types of protagonists. Remember, the protagonist is the main character of the story. So sometimes they're heroic and sometimes they're not. So the word hero can be kind of complex when we're talking about the main characters. Sammy is the protagonist of A&P. The unnamed girl, the babysitter, was the protagonist of Ounce of Cure. Connie was the protagonist of Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been? The protagonist is the one who drives the plot. They have the conflict. They need to make a decision or come to some kind of awareness in the story. In literary fiction, remember, we're interested in seeing how humanity reacts under certain conditions. So that's why it's important to really understand who the protagonist is and how they're changing. Popular fiction is more interested in what's going to happen next, more about the suspense and the excitement and the surprise ending. Literary fiction, not a whole lot of action always happens, but we're interested in more what's the internal struggle of that character. So it's important to know the types of protagonists. We don't see a whole lot of traditional heroes in literary fiction because, again, we're interested in the complexities of humanity, and a traditional hero is a rather simple type of hero. The traditional hero is what we think of as that knight in shining armor, the guy in the white hat, the very purposeful, very strong, very stalwart, brave, heroic type of hero. We don't see very many of those in movies these days. We see a lot more dark characters, more complex characters. The anti-hero, the word anti sounds negative, but the anti-hero is just a more flawed, more human type of a hero. Most of the characters that we've seen today, most of the protagonists that we've read about this semester have been anti-heroes. Sammy and the girl in Ounce of Cure for sure are anti-heroes. Basically, they're human. We can relate to them because they have typical human failings. The Byronic hero is an interesting type of hero because that's the very dark, brooding type of character. Actually, it's called Byronic because it was first developed by Lord Byron, a poet who was known for his very dark, brooding type of poetry. So the Byronic hero is usually driven by dark motives. They usually are alienated from society, obsessed with some action that they want to do, or, like, for example, a revenge, or obsessed with something that happened to them in the past. And they're usually very emotional. And again, they usually end up alienated from society. They're usually the one raging up at heaven and crying, why? And very often they go too far in our regards, even though we're sympathetic to them. A good example of this is, if anybody can remember, Sweeney Todd, played by Johnny Depp, was an excellent example of a Byronic hero. A tragic hero is very interesting. Now, we think of sometimes with tragic heroes that they have to die at the end. Not necessarily. Well, most of Shakespeare's tragedies did have tragic heroes, and most of them did die at the end. But the basic premise of a tragic hero is that, one, they start in a very elevated status. For example, they could be a ruler or a great warrior, and they have a fatal flaw. Most of the time it's false pride or overconfidence, which leads them to a great fall. Some people have seen Connie in Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been as a tragic hero. In that story, you notice that she starts out as kind of the leader of her own little pack, rebellious, defiant against her mother, and not feeling the rules apply to her. Her overconfidence in herself and her abilities leads to her being alone, and leads to her becoming just the very low status of being Arnold Friend's puppet, his little zombie that is devoid of any agency of her own. So these are the main ones that we'll think about this semester. So some factors to think about with setting: time. It's the year, the season, the time of day, all of those factors, whether it's summertime, it's sunset, it's in the 1800s, in the 1950s, all of those factors are going to impact why the characters do what they do and what the story is telling us about humanity. Where is the story taking place? Place, region, interior, I mean inside the building, exterior, outside of the building. Is it by the beach? Is it in a store? Is it in the house? Is it inside a room? Is there a window open? So just like you, when you decorate your room and you make it your place and it reflects your persona, the outside and the exterior and the setting all reflects something that's going on inside the character. It tells us something about them. Atmosphere, weather, culture, societal issues, environmental factors, all of these things impact the characters and have an effect on why they do what they do and what it suggests about society. Here's some factors to think about with point of view. The first person narrator, you kind of think about reliable or unreliable. Is it a naive narrator? Are they young? If they're young and inexperienced, then they may not be able to understand everything that's happening in this big, scary adult world. So they may relate things in a simplistic way that doesn't quite explain what's really happening. Mentally unstable or obsessed narrators, yellow wallpaper, it was hard to tell sometimes what was happening. And we had to interpret and draw conclusions because she was writing it as she was slowly going more off the deep end. Whereas the narrator in the Cask of Amontillado is obsessed with revenge and obsessed with justifying why he does what he does. So those factors come between him telling the truthful, actual reality of what was happening. And time may have an impact on that too. In The Ounce of Cure, probably 20 to 30 years had passed since she actually had that episode where she got drunk when she was babysitting. So she's telling the story from a more mature aspect, more mature perspective. And Cask of Amontillado, 50 years have gone by since he trapped Fortunato and buried him alive to kill him. So that may have an impact on what he remembers and how he tells the story. With third person, we think more about psychic distance. How close does the narrator get to the character's inner psyche, their inner feelings and thoughts? When does the author choose to bring the narrator close or further away? In The Story of an Hour, we get very, very close to Louise while she's in the room and she's thinking about being free and the joy of being independent. But we get very far from her when she is, of course, dead. We don't even know what she's thinking when she sees the husband walk in because there's a scream, she's dead. And then the society has their verdict. So which character does the narrator get close to and why? So when you're reading The Storm, I want you to think about why does the narrator get into which character's thoughts. It starts out with BB, the little boy. Why does it start out with the little boy's thoughts? And then it goes on to Calixta's thoughts and feelings. Why is it in her thoughts and what is it revealing about her character? And then, of course, at a certain point, it switches to her boyfriend's thoughts. And it's interesting to think, why does they choose at those points to be in her boyfriend's thoughts, seeing her through her boyfriend's eyes? So just some overview points about Cask of Amontillado. Edgar Allan Poe is known for his convoluted writing style. He's writing in the early 1800s, so already at that time they were writing very poetic, they like to use big words a lot. But even more so, his writing is kind of like he uses foreign phrases, he uses big words. You may have to look up some of the words to find out what they mean. But it's like a labyrinth, a maze that kind of traps you in and sucks you in, and you get lost and dazzled. And by the time you realize that you're almost as mad as the main character in your mind, you're jumbled up just like they are, or else you become sympathetic toward a darker character who may be plotting an evil deed. So look out for the little traps that he has set for you. The protagonist in this one is Montresor, more like a Byronic type character. He's very dark and brooding, and in fact, he's brooded and brooded about what Fortunato did to him so much that he feels like he needs to kill him, and he wants to kill him in such a way that Fortunato he'll be tricked into it, and he won't know what's happening until the tables have turned and he's trapped inside the crevice there and walled in. So it's very interesting to look at how this character, he likes to use reverse psychology. He tells the servants to, whatever they do, that they have to stay, and of course they want to leave when it's carnival time and it's night and he's not going to be there. He uses reverse psychology with Fortunato. He tells him, oh no, come, it's okay, you're sick, you should go back, actually egging him on to be more and more determined to continue down into the catacombs where he's going to kill him. The setting is incredibly important in Cask of Amontillado. The fact that it takes place during carnival time, and this carnival time in Italy is kind of like Mardi Gras. It's the time of excess before the repentance, which is kind of interesting. We think of, okay, this is the time when, like the purge, this is the time when we can let go, get drunk, and commit crazy deeds, including, in this case, murder, and later on we can face the consequences and repent and fast and pray. So that's important. Plus the idea that you're going down into the catacombs. Look at how going down may also be a downward spiral in his psychology or in his mental state or in his moral state, in fact. The point of view is first person. Again, we have an unreliable narrator because 50 years has gone by and he is so obsessed with his wanting to get revenge that he may not be entirely reliable. Some points about the storm. Kate Chopin is a regional author, and as we've read in The Story of an Hour, she often takes a feminist stance. Remember, this is late 1800s, so women's rights are just starting to get underway a little bit more at this point. But her idea is that women should be held to the same standard as men, instead of being held to a more strict standard. And so we'll see in The Storm how she defies the typical formula that woman sins, woman has to spend the rest of her life repenting, or woman sins, woman needs to jump into the river and drown herself. Woman sins, woman needs to be punished by the man and told to go away and exiled. So all of it, usually that's what happens in stories, that the woman commits some indiscretion or some sin and she has to pay for it. Whereas a lot of times with men, it's more of a joke, right? They commit they go off with another woman and there's not a whole lot of consequences. So she actually is questioning that in this story, not necessarily saying it's good for women to commit extramarital affairs, but more like questioning, like making us think about the usual formulas we've had since our fairy tales, and at the end how she defies and she actually is happy. The storm passes, everyone's happy. Setting is going to be important because, again, she's a regional author. It's Louisiana. The accents, you're going to see how they're talking, more of a French Cajun sort of accents. Their names are French type names. And the point of view is going to be interesting because it's third person omniscient, so we get into all sorts of characters' thoughts and feelings. And I think the author makes a reasonable choice of whose feelings to be in at what time. For example, I think it's important that we get into BB's thoughts and feelings at the beginning, because BB's a little boy and he may have something to do with the story, later on, beyond the bounds of the story. He may have some impact on remembering what happened, or some impact on, again, what happens later on after the end of the story. It's important to know when we are in the woman's thoughts and feelings and when we're in the man's thoughts and feelings. The Kate Chopin's being very careful whose thoughts and feelings we're in when. When is the woman enjoying her romantic relationship with this young man, and when is he looking at her, objectifying her, and so to speak? So whose thoughts are we in when? Another thought, we haven't really talked about denouement or the resolution very much yet, but the denouement is the tying up of the loose ends at the end. Is it open or is it closed? There have been some arguments about the ending of the storm, whether it's open or closed, and that all it's going to depend on whether or not you think that the storm passed and everyone is happy, the end, or if you think the storm passed, but there's got to be something more to it. They're not going to be happy for long. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and I hope these notes kind of guided you as you are continuing your studies this semester.